That's the problem with cutting down a tree. No one tells you how dangerous it might be. Sure, they'll warn you about the falling branches and staying out of the way while the job's being done, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how the tree you are about to cut down might be the only thing standing between you and something very bad. Maybe that's the reason trees have been the object of worship throughout history. Could it be because they are extremely good at keeping things out of our world that we don't want in? Or it could be that it wasn't the tree that was being worshipped, but rather whatever it was that the tree was keeping at bay. Unfortunately for me, the reason our ancestors started worshipping trees in the first place is something that most of us have forgotten until now. I bought the house in the spring of 2009. It was on the Old Kings Highway that cuts through Connecticut between New York and Boston. While it no longer qualifies as a highway by today's standards, it's still a fairly busy road. There is a nice historical marker in the front yard of the house claiming that it had been built in 1700. Of course, the previous owners, which there were many of, had made many improvements to the original house over the years, so it had an updated kitchen and bathrooms. It also had a lot of old growth oak trees in the yard. I believe they are black oaks, but I've never been one to care much about this oak or that oak. There was one particular oak tree in the backyard that was bigger and more majestic than any of the other trees in the yard. Its trunk must have measured at least 6 feet around, occupying the center of the backyard, and all the trees seemed to defer to it. A treehouse or a swing would have seemed right at home at this tree, but it had neither. There was a nice spotlight at its base that pointed up and illuminated the tree at night. Day or night, the oak was really nice to look at. Best of all, it provided excellent shade for the back deck on a hot summer's day. And then it started to die. In the spring of 2010, when the leaves began to come out, I noticed that a couple of the top branches stayed bare. I didn't think it was cause for any immediate alarm. If they stayed bare, I just have to have them removed. So when they were still leafless in the middle of June, I hired an honest tradesman to come over and take the branches down. He and his team made quick work of it, and I didn't think anything about the fact that they broke one of the buzzsaws on the first branch they tried to cut off. I just figured it was a tough old tree, and a broken buzzsaw was one of the hazards of the job. A couple of weeks later, I noticed on some of the other branches on top of the tree that the leaves had started to wilt and turn brown. As the wilting and dying began to spread to additional branches, I became more concerned. By the end of July, the bark on the branches where the trees had first died began to slough off and accumulate at the base of the tree. It was time to seek professional help, so I called in an arborist. She examined the tree and quickly came to the conclusion that it was suffering from something called hypoxin canker. And the really bad news was that there was no known cure for it once symptoms have appeared. The disease is internal and kills the sapwood of the tree. The mighty oak was gonna die in months. It was shortly after getting this grim diagnosis that I noticed something else. My wire-haired dachshund Baxter had this habit of laying down at the base of the trees in my backyard. In the dog version of Hope Springs Eternal, he was convinced that a squirrel would one day be stupid enough to climb down the tree into his waiting paws, and bearing that, perhaps fall out of the tree. He spent his days like this under every oak in the backyard, one time or another. Except the one that was dying. At first I imagined he could sense impending death in the dying oak, but that wasn't it. After some observation, I realized that he didn't bother laying under the tree because there's never any squirrels in it. I could see squirrels in every other tree in my backyard, but not in the dying oak. Not only that, there were no birds in that tree either, not a single bird on any branch, regardless of whether the branch still had leaves on or not. That hadn't been the case with the dying oak. It had formerly been full of squirrels and birds. I considered it strange, but didn't really give it too much thought. There wasn't really any logical reason why animals would avoid this particular tree. Little did I know at the time that I was right about there being no logical reason the animals would avoid that tree. It wasn't the dying tree the squirrels and the birds were avoiding. It was something else entirely. And as the tree died, it was getting closer to getting out. Through the rest of the summer and into the fall, the tree continued to lose leaves and bark. It was apparent to anyone looking at it that it was dying. It occurred to me to have it taken down and be done with it, but I couldn't bring myself to do that. I had a weird sense that the oak was fighting back, and not simply bowing to the inevitable. If that was the case, I was going to give it every opportunity to succeed. But branch by branch, the tree continued to die, until only the lowest ones had any leaves on them. By now it was October, and all the oaks began to lose their leaves. So by the time all the leaves were bare, I couldn't be sure whether the dying oak was gone, or if they would once again sprout some leaves the following spring. The footsteps appeared in March. We'd had a late winter snowfall of about 6 inches of snow, which had tapered off in the early evening of the 20th. I remember the date only because the next day was the equinox, the first day of spring. When I woke up on the morning of the 21st and looked out the back window of my bedroom, I noticed several pairs of footprints in the backyard leading to the dying oak. The footsteps then spread around the tree in a circle at the base. I threw on some clothes and a coat and then, accompanied by Baxter, went out to investigate. I gave Baxter a brief look of reproach as we left the house, and his expression seemed to say, well, apparently you didn't hear anything either. It wasn't easy to determine exactly how many people had been in the backyard, but my guess was about 6. By the looks of things, they had formed a circle around the tree. I didn't have any idea who they were or why they had come. It occurred to me that this may have not been the first time they had been there. The only reason I knew about this visit was the footprints in the snow. There was no other evidence that people had been in there. I followed the footprints out the backyard to see where they originated. They dead-ended at the street in front of my house, which was plowed earlier in the morning. So all I really knew was that a group of people had come into my backyard during the night and gathered around the dying or maybe already dead oak tree. Their purpose for the visit was a mystery to me. I decided that the best thing to do was start leaving the spotlight at the base of the tree on all night. If they intended to make another visit, that might act as a deterrent. Soon the weather started getting warmer and the trees in the yard began to sprout buds and new leaves. I waited anxiously to see what would happen to the dying oak. Was it dead or did it still have some life in it yet? As the days went by, it eventually became clear to me that there would be no new leaves on the tree. It was gone. It saddened me more than I expected to see a dead tree surrounded by new life in the backyard. The sooner I had it removed, I decided, the better. In early June, I contacted the honest tradesman who had earlier removed the dead branches and asked him to come back and remove the entire tree, including the stump. I was still on the phone with the tree service, looking out the back window at the tree when I first noticed what appeared to be a symbol carved into the trunk. Making the appointment for later that week, I hung up and went out to the yard to take a closer look. Sure enough, something was carved in the tree's trunk. It was a plus sign with a circle or ring surrounding the intersection of the lines. The intersecting lines measured about 6 inches each, and the diameter of the circle was about 4 inches. I had no idea who had carved it there, though I suspected it was related to the footprints I had seen in March. I took a picture of the carving with my phone and uploaded it to Facebook to see if any of my friends recognized what the symbol was. Within 1 hour, one of them posted that it resembled a Celtic cross. Sure enough, when I compared pictures to images of other Celtic crosses I found on the web, that's exactly what it was. Specifically, a pre-Christian version before the cross morphed into what the Christian cross is now. Now that I knew what it was time to figure out why it was carved in the tree in the first place. A little research was all it took to learn that the symbol was used by the pagan Celts as protection against evil spirits and spiritual dangers. Armed with this new knowledge, things began to fall into place, or so I thought. I came to the conclusion that some local Wiccans, Druids, whatever you want to call them, had zeroed in on my dying oak, and come to the conclusion that it represented a threat in some way. That would explain the visit of the spring equinox oak tree thing. And the same folks had likely been the ones who have carved this Celtic cross into the trunk. I guessed that both of these actions were efforts to remove whatever threat they thought the tree represented. My plans were a bit more modern. Cut it down. Over the next couple of days, I noticed that the dead oak started to lean to the right. Each morning, its lean was a little bit more pronounced. It was as if someone or something was pushing it out of the way. Baxter started to avoid going anywhere near the tree, which was interesting because I had assumed the digging at the base of the tree was his work. Most of the digging was on the side of the tree, opposite of the direction in which it leaned. My mistake was to assume that something was digging into the ground, rather than digging out. Frankly, it would have been difficult to tell the difference. In any case, the lean was getting worse, and I grew more anxious to get that tree down. As planned on Friday morning, the tree crew showed up to take it down. If any of the team noticed the Celtic cross carved into the tree, they didn't mention it. They went right to work, removing the top branches first. As they worked their way down the tree, I tried to ignore the growing unease I felt. It seemed irrational, but nevertheless, the feeling lingered. Around midday, the tree seemed to start giving a slight lurch further to the right, knocking one of the men cutting the branches off balance and causing the branch he was working on to suddenly break off. It fell to the ground and delivered a glancing blow to one of the other men. It hit him hard enough to knock him to the ground. And when he stood back up, it was obvious that he had dislocated his shoulder. After the hurt worker was loaded into one of the trucks and driven to the ER to get his arm looked at, the remaining men went back to work on the tree. By early afternoon, the only thing left was the stump. The smaller branches had been loaded into the wood chipper and chopped into small pieces. Larger branches in the trunk were cut into small logs and loaded to the back of one of the trucks. They now brought in the stump grinder and turned what remained of the trunk and visible roots into a pile of wood chips that were being shoveled into the back of one of the trucks. After that, there was nothing left to do but pack up, and as they prepared to leave, I thanked them for their work. Then it was just me and Baxter in the backyard. I walked over to where the tree had once stood. I would need to put sod over that area. It was now just a few scattered wood chips and loose dirt. That was 3 days ago. A lot's happened since then. The first morning after the oak was cut down, I noticed the hole in the ground where it had stood. It wasn't very large, but it looked impossibly deep. Even if Baxter had the nerve to go near the spot, it wasn't a hole he could possibly have dug. The second morning, the hole was bigger and still impossibly deep. Around the edges of it was bits of fur and pieces of bone of some unidentified animal. There were also markings in the dirt that looked like it had been clawed on by a very large animal. The claw markings radiated outward of the hole. I spent the rest of the day getting bags of dirt from Home Depot and filling the hole. Only it never quite filled up. That was yesterday. This morning I woke up and found the hole was back and bigger than ever. There were footprints of several different people in the dirt around the hole. It wasn't like the first time they had appeared in the snow. Rather, it looked like there had been some sort of struggle. The only other thing I found in the dirt was a necklace with the Celtic cross hanging from it. The necklace was broken, but I put it in my pocket anyway. That was 12 hours ago. As it got dark, I started to hear noises coming from the backyard. Baxter didn't come back from his after-dinner trip outside and didn't come when I called him. I eventually hear him start barking, and it wasn't confident barking. Baxter sounded terrified. I began to suspect that it was never the tree that was the danger. The ceremony on the spring equinox, the Celtic cross carved into the tree, were both designed to give it the ability to continue its job as the jailer even after it died. Cutting it down was likely the last thing I should have done. And now something has come up from underneath where the oak once stood, imprisoning it. I don't know what it is, and I don't know what it wants, but I hear it outside, the house's back door. Baxter's barking stopped long ago, with a straggled yelp. Maybe between the broken buzzsaw and the dislocated shoulder, the oak had been trying to tell me even a dead tree is better than no tree. I don't think I will ever know the answer to that. That's the problem with cutting down a tree. No one tells you how dangerous it might be. Ghouls, I apologize for the lack of visuals. I just kind of threw a GIF there for the whole thing. Ghouls, I'm exhausted. I'm sorry. I mean, I did my recording and stuff the normal way, but I can't today. And I didn't have time to do this stuff, before. So I'm doing this literally Thursday, the day before I need to edit it and have it out. And I usually have it done by now. It's just, boy, I haven't had this hard of a job in a long time. So I'm really tired and I'm exhausted. And I just want to go upstairs and hang out with my kid and my husband. So I apologize for the lack of visuals in this one. Hopefully, as I get used to this, new work schedule, I'll be able to do it normally again. But yes, as always, ghouls, the last video will be on the top left. The next video will be on the bottom left. All my social medias are on the screen as well as in the description box below. And remember, there's always someone or something watching you.